3 years after the fall of Constantinople, the Ottoman Empire appeared unstoppable. The ancient capital of the Byzantines had fallen. Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, was building one of the most formidable military powers in the world, and many feared that Central Europe would be next. Standing in his path was a frontier fortress on the banks of the Danube, a city that most people today rarely think about, but one which would become the focal point of a struggle that captured the attention of Christian Europe. This is the story of Belgrade in 1456, of the men who defended it, and of the siege that helped shape the future of the continent.
This is the History of the World podcast. Written and presented by Chris Hasler.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Marvel Television's Wonder Man, an 8-episode series, now streaming on Disney+.
A superhero remake, not exactly what we'd expect from an Oscar-winning director.
Action! Simon Williams, audition for Wonder Man.
I'm gonna need you to sign this, assuming you don't have superpowers.
I'll never work again if anyone found out.
My lips are sealed.
Marvel Television's Wonder Man. All 8 episodes now streaming, only on Disney+.
Volume 5, The Expansionist World. Episode 2, The Siege of Belgrade. Archaeological finds provide evidence of the area of the city of Belgrade being occupied by humans from at least 50,000 years ago. This is the area of the confluence of the Sava and Danube rivers in the north-central part of the modern country of Serbia in southeast Europe, otherwise known as the Balkans. This confluence represents a crossroads of major historic travel and trade routes. There is evidence of significant development during the Neolithic period, primarily when the Vinča culture from around 7,000 years ago made advancements in metallurgy, symbolic markings, and settlement development. There is comparatively little that is well documented after the decline of the Vinča culture until Thracian and Dacian tribes became prominent in the region during the first millennium BCE. The earliest known settlement at Belgrade was actually established by Celts, and more specifically the Scordisci tribe, who named their settlement Singidun. The Celts certainly recognised the strategic advantages of Singidun, situated on a promontory overlooking the rivers. By the 1st century BCE, the Romans had recognised the same strategic advantages as the Celts. The Romans brought the city into their sphere of influence, and its location meant that it would be key to their northern frontier. Therefore, Singidun became Singidunum, and the city became a fortified settlement. A Roman castrum was built to command the approaches from the north, and the settlement was completed with temples and baths for the population. The Roman legion named the lucky Flavian 4th Legion was stationed at Singidunum after the Dacian invasion in the year 86. The population of the city expanded. Singidunum continued to be a frontier fortress, while the Roman Empire split into two halves during the 4th century. It became a part of the Eastern Roman Empire, but its close proximity to the northern frontier often made it a target for attack. The Romans did not have the level of strength required to keep control of Singidunum after the split. In 441, the Huns destroyed the city and enslaved the population. After the collapse of the Hunnic state, the city possibly came under the control of the Sarmatians briefly, before they were expelled by the Ostrogoths. The Gepids took the city from the Ostrogoths before the Ostrogoths recaptured it in 504. It was after a major plunder of the city by the Avars and Slavs that brought long-term Slavic settlement to the city. The modern name for the city, Belgrade, is a Slavic name meaning white city, and it is unclear exactly when the city officially changed its name from the Roman Singidunum to the Slavic Belgrade, but we can be sure it happened before the end of the 9th century, when the city was under the control of the Bulgarians. Due to its location, frequently on the fringes of competing states, control of the city would switch fairly frequently during the early Middle Ages, and the Byzantines always maintained a keen interest in controlling it, despite the Slavic ambitions to control it themselves. With the emergence of the Hungarians as a powerful polity north of the Danube, yet another competitor for control of the city emerged. It really would not have been a great place to live, being a city constantly on the borderlands and susceptible to attack. The Hungarians did not seem to place the same value on Belgrade as the Byzantines did. Granted, it was a valuable strategic stronghold, but the Hungarians thought nothing of dismantling its buildings in order to use the resources to create buildings in other locations. An example of the vulnerability and attitudes towards Belgrade is when the Hungarians used materials from Belgrade to create buildings in the town of Zemun, until the Byzantines destroyed Zemun and started to rebuild Belgrade. As an important city for the eastbound Crusaders during the 12th and 13th centuries, the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa noted that the city was in ruins when he passed through in the year 1189. Byzantine decline meant that the Hungarians were in control of the city again in the 13th century, but the Hungarian king gifted Belgrade to his son-in-law, Stefan Dragutin, who added it to his Serbian kingdom of Sirmia in 1284. But the city was taken back by Hungary when Dragutin passed away and Sirmia was absorbed back into the wider Kingdom of Serbia again in 1325. The Kingdom of Hungary. A group of people called the Magyars migrated westwards into Europe around the turn of the 10th century. The Magyars are a Finno-Ugric people, so they are comparatively closely related to Finnish and Estonian speakers. We're not sure about the exact nature of the Magyar migration, but it would be reasonable to assume it may have come from northeast of the Carpathian Basin, simply due to those linguistic connections. It was Almos and his son Arpad who led the Magyars to the Carpathian Basin, where the Principality of Hungary was established. The subsequent Grand Princes of the Arpad dynasty spent the first few decades of the 10th century launching raids on the lands of their wealthier and more established European neighbours to their west and south. it would be down to the King of Germany and Italy, Otto, to put an end to these raids by defeating the Magyars in battle at Lechfeld in 955. The Magyars had to consider a more conventional manner to run their state than the nomadic raiding which had been their forte. Otto's victory at Lechfeld strengthened his position enormously, and he would later be crowned Holy Roman Emperor in 962. It would be the great-grandson of Arpad, originally called Vaik, who did the most to modernise the Hungarian state, and due to embracing Christianity, the Pope would recognise him as the king of his people. He would change his name to Stephen and become the first recognised king of Hungary in around the year 1000. His changes to administration and legislation did much to modernise the Hungarian state. The Magyars could consider themselves Europeanised. King Stephen would eventually be canonised as Saint Stephen. Being positioned between the mighty empires of the Holy Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire, the Hungarians had to find a way not just to survive, but to prosper. They would produce wealth through agriculture and trade, and further to that, by political influence. From their heartlands, they expanded their influence west across the Danube, east into Transylvania, and south towards the Adriatic. The highlight of which was in 1102, when a personal union with the Crown of Croatia extended Hungarian influence. A system of wooden royal castles aided the security of the realm. Internal power struggles led to a critical weakening of central authority. This meant that powerful nobles were able to put King Andrew II in a position of issuing the Golden Bull of 1222, a document that limited royal power and the privileges of the nobles, also making the king accountable to the nobles if the king acted outside the boundaries of the law. This was not completely unlike what nobles had done when rising up against the authority of King John of England, leading to the signing of Magna Carta some 7 years earlier. Disaster was soon to come to Hungary after this, when the Mongols arrived from the east under Batu Khan and Subutai, characters we met during our episodes on the Mongols from Volume 4. The Mongols ravaged the kingdom, with suggestions of around 20% of the population wiped out. After defeat at the Battle of Mohi in 1241, the Mongols retreated, traditionally attributed to the death of the Great Khan, though historians continue to debate the full reasons for their withdrawal. So, the Hungarian king Bela IV acted fast, replacing the useless wooden fortifications with stone castles, granting royal lands to nobles in return for their loyalty, and inviting foreigners to settle their lands, such as Cumans and Germans. The Hungarian kingdom was far better equipped to deal with future Mongol raids. This led to economic augmentation, with the gold and silver mines of their lands being exploited, and more immigration diversifying and increasing the population. The succession crisis following the end of the Arpad dynasty proved to only be a small stumbling block in the growth and success of Hungary. The death of King Andrew III in 1301 with no male heir meant that powerful oligarchs took control of the kingdom until Charles I of Anjou secured the throne in 1308. Through Charles and his son Louis the Great, Hungary's mining wealth and expansion of influence saw Hungary reach the peak of its medieval power. Louis the Great died with no male heir, and another succession crisis followed. This time, the throne would ultimately come under the control of an ambitious and dynamic man who was married to Louis's daughter, Mary. He was known as Sigismund of Luxembourg, and he would not only become King of Hungary, but also King of Germany, King of Bohemia, and Holy Roman Emperor. It was during his reign that the threat of the Ottoman Empire became a reality, so Sigismund organised and led the Crusade of Nicopolis in 1396. It was a disaster, as the Ottomans defeated the Hungarians, leading to a switch in strategy. Now the priority for Hungary was defending their territory. The Serbian Despotate. The Slavic migrations of the 6th and 7th centuries brought the ancestors of the Serbs to their location in the Balkans, where they would develop their unique identity in lands that had been under the control of the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantines allowed them to settle and to some extent exercise a level of autonomy, but the Byzantines still endeavoured to maintain general influence over the region. This would include the gradual conversion of the Serbs to Orthodox Christianity. As an effective vassal of the Byzantines, Prince Vlastimir ruled over the earliest recognisable Serbian state from the 830s. The Vlastimirovic dynasty would have to repel the invasions of the Bulgarians. By the end of the 9th century, the Serbs had established a recognisable and centralised Christian state, bordered by the Byzantines to the south, the Bulgarians to the east, the Magyars to the north, and the Croats to the west. Through the 10th and 11th centuries, Serbia would attempt to operate autonomously from the Byzantines, who would periodically remind them that they were the great ruling power of the Balkans, and that Serbia should remember that fact, especially with the threat of the Bulgarians casting a shadow over Serbian lands. With the emergence of the Seljuk Turks in the 12th century becoming a major threat to the Byzantines, the Serbs were able to achieve more autonomy again under their ruler Stefan Nemanja. Under Nemanja, the lands of Serbia were able to escape Byzantine influence, as the Byzantines faced great problems with the Seljuks on their eastern flanks. With the weakening of the Byzantine Empire, Serbia could flourish, and with the support of the Pope during the 1210s, Nemanja's son, Stefan Nemanjić, was crowned the first king of Serbia, and a younger son, Rastko Nemanjić, became the first archbishop of the Serbian Orthodox Church, moving Serbia away from Byzantine influence on both a secular and religious level. Rastko is remembered as Saint Sava of Serbia, the Illuminator. The Nemanjić dynasty of rulers expanded Serbian territories and developed a rich monastic culture reflected in their major churches and monasteries, with state funding being aided by a successful mining industry. Serbia's peak was on an imperial scale when Stefan Dusan became the ruler, crowning himself as the emperor of the Serbs and Greeks, thereby forming the Serbian Empire. Centralisation was bolstered by the issuing of Dusan's Code, a legal system which was one of Europe's most sophisticated during the medieval period. Serbia had reached its medieval peak, but as we have seen in the past, rapid expansion often leads to fragmentation, and on the death of Dusan in 1355, the stability of the empire weakened significantly when regional nobles saw their opportunity to seize power for themselves. The Ottomans took control of the southernmost Balkan lands of Serbia by defeating them in battle in 1371. So Serbia decided to confront the Ottomans again, this time at the Battle of Kosovo Field in 1389. Extremely heavy losses were experienced on both sides, including the Ottoman Sultan and the ruler of Moravian Serbia. Although not conquered, Serbia had to concede to operate as a vassal state of the Ottoman Empire until the Ottomans faced difficulties on their eastern fronts from the Timurids. It was at this point that Serbia became more closely aligned with Hungary, and the ruler, Stefan Lazarevic, received the title of despot from the Byzantines, and so the Serbian despotate came into being. The Ottoman Empire. During the 13th century, Mongol incursions into the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum weakened the central state, causing the Turkic frontier lord Osman to create his own rulership dynasty from lands in Bithynia belonging to the Byzantine Empire. We have covered the origins and expansion of the Ottoman Empire in some detail during particular dedicated episodes in volumes 4 and 5, so we will keep the details to a minimum here. Osman's son Orhan captured the city of Bursa in 1326, thereby giving the Ottomans a capital city from which to construct the nucleus of an organised state. Northwestern Anatolia would come under Ottoman control and be further consolidated by the development of a standing military system that would eventually produce the elite Janissary Corps, young men who had been groomed to serve the Sultan in this capacity. The Ottoman expansion was relentless as they exploited Byzantine weakness in order to grasp control of large swathes of their European lands. They took the city of Adrianople, converting it to their renamed capital city, Edirne. The Serbians led a resistance to their expansion, leading to a brutal clash at the Battle of Kosovo in 1389, in which Ottoman expulsion was a failure, despite heavy losses on both sides. The Ottoman presence in Europe was now permanent. The Ottomans would continue to build their power in the Balkans, but there was a setback when Tamerlane of the Timurid Empire defeated the Ottomans at the Battle of Ankara in 1402, triggering civil disorder and a succession crisis. Unity was restored by Sultan Mehmed I, who emerged as the new ruler in 1413. Mehmed rebuilt the state, and expansion was on the Ottoman agenda again. John Hunyadi. Sometime in the late to mid-opening decade of the 1400s, John was born, son of Wojciech, who is considered by many historians to be of Wallachian origin. Wojciech served as a court knight to King Sigismund of Hungary and was rewarded with Hunyad Castle and its lands in present-day Transylvania. This is how John earned his name, Hunyadi. As a young man, John received military training at the court of King Sigismund and quickly rose through the ranks. As a man in the Hungarian military, John Hunyadi was trusted and impressive. Campaigns against the Hussites in Bohemia and the Ottomans helped to increase his military experience. In 1441, he was appointed the voivode of Transylvania, essentially becoming the commander of the kingdom's southern defence. This was a great responsibility, as it could be viewed as Christian Europe's southern front against Ottoman expansion, so John's position would have been of great interest to Europe as a whole. His victories against Ottoman aggression in the early 1440s would have been viewed as heroic achievements by Christian Europe as a whole. The pressure of the Ottoman Empire was not extinguished by John's victories, as they only served to be temporarily holding the Ottomans off. The Hungarians didn't quite have the military might to push the Ottomans back out of the Balkans altogether, and some defeats were experienced alongside the successes. Nonetheless, the Hungarians felt that they could do no better than John, and this was affirmed when John was appointed the regent for the boy king Ladislaus V, more commonly known as Ladislaus the Posthumous, in the year 1446. John continued campaigns against the Ottomans during this period, reorganised the army and strengthened Hungary's defences, and it was just as well because of the pivotal event which happened in 1453 when the Ottoman Empire finally conquered Constantinople and eliminated the Byzantine Empire from the map, sending shockwaves throughout Christian Europe. John Hunyadi would be fully aware in this aftermath that his kingdom would be one of the first major targets for the growing Ottoman threat. Mehmed II. Before the conquest of Constantinople, the Ottoman capital city in Europe was at Edirne, formerly Adrianople. In 1432, the future Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II was born there, the son of Sultan Murad II and his Balkan concubine Humar Hatun. As a young prince, Mehmed was thrown into a regime of intensive training. Islamic law and theology were high on the agenda of subjects, and Mehmed was exposed to many great minds in the Ottoman world to learn from their attained wisdom. Mehmed would also be introduced to Greek and Latin, and it was deemed important for him to have a strong understanding of Byzantine and European culture in order to make effective diplomatic decisions when the time came. At 12 years old, Mehmed was thrown into a great responsibility when Sultan Murad II decided to abdicate in favour of his son, believing in the political stability of the Ottoman Empire, allowing for him to take early retirement. Many senior officials and military leaders were unnerved by this move, concerned about the young age and inexperience of the new sultan. John Hunyadi in Hungary sought to exploit this Ottoman unrest and launched a campaign against the Ottomans. Murad was hurriedly recalled and defeated the Hungarians and their allies at the Battle of Varna in 1444. In the aftermath, the Janissaries demanded the reinstatement of Murad as sultan, and so it came to pass in 1446. Mehmed, the teenage sultan, abdicated, and he was sent to Manisa in the west of the modern state of Turkey to develop further his abilities. This humiliation only served to increase his determination to succeed. In 1451, Murad II passed away, and so Mehmed II would seize the opportunity to be the sultan again, and this time as an 18-year-old. He was not prepared to fail. In his mind, the quintessential plan was the conquest of Constantinople, the long-standing Byzantine capital. By 1453, the 21-year-old sultan had achieved his goal, and Constantinople was now in Ottoman hands. Mehmed showed wisdom when blending Islamic law with Byzantine traditions in order to create a centralised state within the lost Byzantine lands. Mehmed recognised that his next threat would be Hungary, so he focused on consolidating and expanding his domains in both Anatolia and southeastern Europe. In the Balkans, Mehmed pushed against Serbian, Bosnian and Albanian lands, alternating sieges, tributary arrangements and punitive campaigns. Serbia was turned into a vassal state. Next on his horizon was the Hungarian city of Belgrade. Prelude to the battle. Belgrade was a formidable stronghold at the confluence of the Danube and Sava rivers, and as such it was widely recognised as the key to Hungary's southern frontier and a gateway into Central Europe. Mehmed had assembled a massive army, probably somewhere between 60,000 and 100,000 men. If he could take Belgrade and break Hungarian resistance, the road into Central Europe would be open. Mehmed was confident. Recent victories made the Ottomans feel irresistible. New cannons were cast following their success at Constantinople 3 years earlier, and a flotilla of roughly 200 river galleys were built to control the Danube. Tribute was demanded from local tribes, in the form of mercenaries to guard the Ottoman flanks. John Hunyadi knew the attack was coming and prepared in advance, but he knew that he would need the support of the other Christian armies of Europe in order to be able to cope with the masses of the Ottoman forces. Hunyadi had already prepared for a siege in advance by stockpiling supplies in order to sustain the population of the city and by strengthening the fortress. With the Serbian despotate fragmented in its political position between Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, both commanders attempted to recruit Serbian mercenaries. Stefan Lazarevich's nephew and successor as the despot of Serbia was Đurađ Branković, who could not wield the same power over his nobles as the Serbian emperors of the years gone by. The Ottomans would require vassal troops from Ottoman-occupied Serbian lands. Traditionally, Serbia had supported Hungary against the Ottomans, so while Branković wanted to defend his heartlands against Ottoman aggression and therefore had a common enemy with Hungary, Branković distrusted Hunyadi due to Hungary's own ambitions to control Serbian lands. Serbian support for Hungary was therefore voluntary, but Branković was certainly against the Ottomans. Fortunately for John Hunyadi, the Pope Calixtus III had proclaimed a crusade after the fall of Constantinople. Calixtus turned to the well-known Franciscan friar Giovanni da Capistrano, a man in his 70s, to rally tens of thousands of volunteers to the Hungarian cause. These people were certainly not noblemen or trained soldiers. Instead, they were peasants and townfolk, armed solely with what they could lay their hands on. Their individual prospects alone would not have been enough to intimidate the mighty Ottoman forces, but their number was vital to the Hungarians in what might otherwise be a hopeless cause. It was in early 1456 that Mehmed would begin his march from Edirne in the belief that once Belgrade fell, he would be dining in the capital city of Hungary, Buda, within 2 months. The Siege of Belgrade. The siege formally began on the 4th of July 1456 when the Ottomans had cut Belgrade off from reinforcement by river using their flotilla, and their artillery began pounding the walls of the city. The idea was that constant bombardment had aided the Ottoman victory at Constantinople against the Byzantines just 3 years earlier. Hunyadi's preparations meant that Belgrade was a central citadel protected by inner walls and then outer walls, meaning that Ottoman penetration of the walls would require considerable patience, especially as the Hungarians themselves had built heavy artillery platforms from which they could fire back at any approaching Ottomans. The Hungarians had gathered supplies, meaning that they were prepared for the long haul. If Mehmed could maintain his control of the Hungarian supply lines, then that would surely hasten Belgrade's decline. The bombardment was causing damage to the city's outer walls as the population of the city attempted to patch up each breach. 10 days in, and Hunyadi recognised that it wasn't going to just be enough to survive the bombardment. He needed to find a way to breach the blockade and reopen the Danube to allow reinforcements and supplies into the city. So Hunyadi assembled a flotilla of Christian ships and filled them with combustible materials. These flaming ships were sent downriver to create chaos among the Ottoman blockade. During the naval engagement, the agile Hungarian flotilla sank and captured a significant number of Ottoman galleys. The blockade had been broken, and reinforcements and supplies were able to be ferried into Belgrade's central fortress, buying more valuable time for the Hungarians. Despite this moral victory, the Ottomans continued to assault the defensive walls of the city. The fact that Hunyadi had managed to buy the city more time following the successful penetration of the Ottoman naval blockade meant that more Christian volunteers, inspired to join the cause by Giovanni da Capistrano, were able to gather with the Hungarian forces outside the city. Mehmed must have felt the pressure mounting against him, so he would have to consider making an all-out assault on the city before too many Christian volunteers and armies rallied to the Hungarian cause, making retreat the only option. Therefore, by the 21st of July, a week after the naval breakthrough, Mehmed ordered a full-scale assault on Belgrade. Many Ottoman troops, which included light infantry and janissaries, surged through the breaches in the defensive walls, and the Hungarians were thrown into close quarters combat with their adversaries. Hand-to-hand combat took place in the streets and courtyards of Belgrade, with the defenders using anything that they could lay their hands on to defend the city and their lives. As the Ottomans attempted to reach the citadel, the defenders would ignite material covered in pitch to create a wall of fire that prevented further progress until nightfall. The following morning, many of the peasants that had gathered lost patience and, against orders, decided to loot Ottoman positions. Hunyadi and Capistrano had lost control of their men, and this would have been a highly unnerving moment that could have spelled disaster for the defence. The sight of these rebellious few attempting to attack the Ottomans inspired more and more peasants to join in, and soon it became obvious that this was not a disastrous turn of events, but actually an opportunity to capitalise. As Hunyadi realised that this unplanned chaos was actually troubling the Ottomans, he ordered a full-on attack. Now the defenders were the aggressors, and the Ottomans were the ones fighting for their lives. Realising that things were coming to a head, the Ottoman Sultan himself joined the fighting, but found himself wounded, possibly by an arrow in the thigh. The momentum had turned in the favour of the Hungarians, and after capturing a large number of the Ottoman artillery and siege weapons, Hunyadi finally regained control of his troops and called them back into the inner city to prepare for the next wave of Ottoman assault. The next wave did not come. The Ottomans, having lost much of their resources and not knowing if their Sultan had been fatally wounded, decided enough was enough and retreated from the city. The siege had been unsuccessful. Aftermath. John Hunyadi's victory over the Ottomans was celebrated as a major triumph across Christian Europe. Pope Calixtus ordered that church bells be rung daily at noon to commemorate the victory, believed to be influenced by divine intervention. The aftermath of the battle had left Belgrade in a dire state. Corpses littered the battlefield and the camps. Food was scarce and sanitation had collapsed. Plague and dysentery swept through the city. The epidemic may have been bubonic plague, though historians remain uncertain about its precise nature. Thousands more died, including the great John Hunyadi himself. Within 3 weeks of his heroic victory, he was no more. He was around 50 years old, and he would be hailed as the White Knight of Christendom. Mehmed recovered from his victories and immediately set about planning his next campaigns. After the humiliation of Belgrade, he transferred his attention elsewhere. Serbia would fall to the Ottomans in 1459. The same disease that had killed John Hunyadi had also taken the life of the Serbian despot Juraj Branković, who incidentally was not recorded as being present at the siege of Belgrade. Mehmed would go on to conquer Bosnia, Trebizond, Albania, and Crimea in the 20 years following the Great Siege. By the time of Mehmed's death in 1481, he had created a vast empire and a lasting legacy. Hunyadi's death sparked a bit of a crisis in Hungary with internal political instability. His son, Matthias Corvinus, was elected the king in 1458 at just 14 years of age and after a 2-year political struggle. The instability persisted during his minority, but when he came of age, he proved to be an effective monarch, escalating Hungary to becoming a major European power, boasting one of the finest professional armies in the world. His eventual death in the year 1490 left Hungary with an uncertain future, and one which we will explore in our next episode. The failure at Belgrade encouraged Mehmed to pursue expansion elsewhere. The city remained a formidable obstacle, but Ottoman attention was largely directed towards Serbia, Bosnia, Albania, Trebizond, and Crimea during the remainder of his reign. The Ottomans would focus on improving their naval prowess, expanding on its trade routes, and growing its area of influence. By 1500, it could claim to be the strongest state in the eastern Mediterranean, something that the city of Belgrade should perhaps begin to worry about again. The Ottomans would eventually come back to Belgrade under Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent in 1521, but certainly not during the remainder of the 15th century, and that was thanks to the heroics of John Hunyadi. As such, John Hunyadi became regarded as a national hero in both Hungary and modern Romania, where many historians trace his family origins. The remainder of the 15th century allowed Hungary to flourish and Christian Europe to develop gunpowder technology, and this was thanks to the time bought by the resistance of the Hungarians at Belgrade. The ringing of bells at midday in many Christian churches continues as a tradition to this very day and can trace its origin back to the decree of Pope Calixtus III, who ordered the ringing of the bells at midday as a call to prayer during that very siege. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the History of the World podcast on the Siege of Belgrade. What a pivotal moment in European history, and one of those what-if moments of history, of especially European history. Had the Ottomans been successful, what would have happened next? Very interesting to speculate, but of course we will never know. Anyway, this is the second episode of the new volume, Volume 5, and of course we were waiting such a long time for Volume 5, and in the meantime, I was still receiving plenty of messages, and there were a lot of new patrons to the podcast as well. So I'm going to attempt to rattle off all of the new patrons. So bear with me while I do that. Going back in history, and some of these names, maybe I don't know if they were authentic or not. I don't know. But we've got Matt Girard, we've got Mike Petrie, we've got Tom, we've got an anonymous somebody, but I will have to mention. We've got Michael, Deborah Driscoll. Thank you, Deborah. A very generous contribution you made. Thank you. With Brandon Johnson, we have Jean, we've got Larry S, we've got AL, we've got Patrick Etherington, Queen of Chaos, Jay, Wendy Coleflesh, Tom. I don't know if that's the same Tom as earlier. Perhaps it might be. We've got John Mould, We've got Medusamon. Don't know if I've pronounced that correctly. Kelvin Gascoigne. Paul. We've got Andrew Melton. Errol Onat. Shannon. And Ryan Hoyle. You all deserve a mention, so I make no apology for rattling all those names off. So thank you, everyone. And I suppose the only apology I've got to make is I'm sorry for the lack of material, but hopefully you've enjoyed the huge back catalogue that we've got at the moment. And, I hope that really is as entertaining as it can be, considering there's been no new material. But now, hopefully, we've bombarded you with new material, especially with the sister podcast as well, History of the World podcast Timelines, which is a lot of fun to make. So I'm really proud and excited to bring that to you as well. And if you want to write me a message, obviously, as I mentioned, a lot of new messages, but if you'd like to write me a message, then please do so. The email address is historyoftheworldpodcast@mail.com. Let's read out one or two. Seema Dawson wrote in to say, hello, in your podcast, Volume 3, Ancient History, Religion of India, you mentioned that Islam is monotheistic, which is in complete contrast to Hinduism. Hinduism is monotheistic and believes in God manifesting in different forms. Can we talk about this? I'm going to listen to your other podcast to confirm if you mentioned this accuracy again. Respectfully, Seema Dawson. Yeah, it's an extremely tricky one, this. I suppose in some respects you can describe Hinduism as monotheistic. And I think it's probably my desire to contrast between the Abrahamic religions, where there is very much, very often, and we have to oversimplify things, especially in podcast form. But really, there is one God, isn't there? In Islam, Christianity, Judaism. I suppose where the confusion lies is if we look at Hinduism, it's a case of there being so many manifestations of the overall spiritual power that maybe describing it as polytheistic is probably very much oversimplifying things. And certainly, I mean, if you look at for example, Christianity, where we say the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, there alone are three manifestations of God when we talk about the trilogy. So, yes, it's a very, very valid point, and I think in a podcast where I'm not really discussing the religion as a main topic. Yeah, it could be an oversimplification to describe Hinduism as monotheistic or polytheistic. It's very much more complicated than that. And thank you, Seema. It's a very, very valid point, well made. Andrew Phelan wrote in and said, hi, I am a history student at the University of Central Florida in the United States and just started listening to your podcast for an assignment on Lachish. Your style and explanation is incredible and would love the chance to correspond with you. My focus is biblical and ancient Near East history, but am very excited to continue listening. Andrew, feel free to get in touch anytime you like. And thank you for the message. The next message is from Mike. Dear Chris, just a quick note to say that I've discovered your podcast, stumbling upon it in my search for exactly what you're doing, a chronological history of humankind. I've listened to Mike Duncan's podcasts on revolutions and then Rome, became interested in the gradual evolution of humanity and frustrated at the arbitrary boundaries and petty obsessions of historians' artificial boundaries around the things that they're interested in. Like, there's no Rome without the Greeks, but damned if I can find someone else linking the two in podcast form. I'm also keenly interested in modern history, so I'm excited to hear your take on it. So thanks. Your lack of academic expertise is an asset and pairs you well with your curiosity, intelligence and discipline. As a heavily accented southerner, Devon representing, then I'm absolutely loving the vocals. I know you're mad popular now, and this probably gets lost in the ether. I beg your pardon. But I just wanted to say that I've found the podcast and am now on the journey from episode 1, and it's great. Take care and thanks again, Mike 39.5. And you did write a little expletive in there, which I left out because I don't do expletives. So, but thank you, Mike. And I'm sure our listeners can guess maybe what it was. Another one here from Robert Mishud. Mishud. I apologise. Hello, Chris. I only started listening to the History of the World podcast 3 weeks ago, and I'm now about to start volume 2. I am thoroughly enjoying it and have recommended it to others. You're doing a great job, and I'm so grateful for such an interesting and engaging podcast. Thank you very much, and keep up the good work. Robert Mishud from Raleigh, North Carolina, USA. Thank you very much, Robert. And of course, if we always invite you to make a financial contribution, all of you, to the podcast, if you can contribute through Patreon, I should say, or buy me a book, which is the Buy Me a Coffee website. It really does help in the production and to cover the expenses of the podcast, of which there are a few. But of course, if you can't, or if you don't feel inclined to make any kind of financial contribution, please do as Richard has done, or Robert, I should say, I'm making up names now. Robert, please do as Robert has done, and do recommend it to as many people as you can, and get it out there so that everyone can get involved and enjoy it. Well, look, I'm going to round off there because there are plenty more messages, and I don't want to fill up too much time of the podcast with messages, but I do want to read as many out as possible. I think it's quite important that we recognise everyone's efforts to write into the podcast, so I really hugely appreciate it. So thank you so much. Next time, we'll be telling the story of the Battle of Muhaç, the first time around. And this was when the Ottomans really wanted to send a message to the Hungarians in a big way. And we'll tell the next part of the story. We'll learn more about Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. And that will be in our next episode. But until then, thank you so much for listening, and don't forget, be good.
Are you enjoying the History of the World podcast? If so, visit historyoftheworldpodcast.com, click on the Patreon link, and sign up to make a monthly contribution. Follow the History of the World podcast on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, Threads, Tumblr, and Mastodon. And don't forget to look out for our sister podcast, History of the World Podcast Timelines. Thanks for listening.